When my husband died, he didn't leave me flowers, or a letter filled with last words. He left me a key, and an address I had never seen before. I thought it was some forgotten property, maybe an old investment. But when I drove out to that narrow road on the edge of town, the house waiting there didn't feel abandoned. It felt patient. The porch light was still wired, the grass trimmed. And on the front door, a note in his handwriting: "Don't be afraid of what listens back." That line should have scared me, but instead, it pulled me forward. Inside, the house smelled faintly of pine and dust, like memory soaked in air. The floorboards murmured under my shoes. Every step echoed like someone breathing behind the walls. There was furniture, covered in white sheets, as if the house had been dressed for mourning long before I arrived. I remember thinking, this is what grief sounds like when it waits too long to be heard. In the living room, I found a locked cabinet with the same key symbol etched into the handle as the one on the note. I turned the key. The cabinet opened with a sigh, and inside was an old photograph. My husband, 20 years younger, standing beside a woman who looked almost exactly like me. And that's where the story should have ended. But of course, it didn't. Movie camera, if you've ever found something that made you question everything you thought you knew about love, family, or truth, stay. Because what I found in that house changed everything. The second day I returned to the house, the sky was the color of bruised glass. I told myself I was there to take inventory, to be practical, to handle the estate. But that wasn't true. I came back because I couldn't stop thinking about the woman in that photo, the one who looked like me. The house greeted me the same way as before, silent but aware. Dust had gathered only where I hadn't stepped. The air held the same chill, but there was a faint hum I hadn't noticed before, low, constant, coming from beneath the floorboards. I followed it to the kitchen, where I found a small trapdoor hidden beneath a rug. There was no lock, just another key symbol, this one carved directly into the wood. It matched the one on the cabinet handle. I hesitated. Every story I'd ever heard about basements began with bad decisions. But curiosity is louder than fear when it's personal. I pulled the handle. The door opened with a groan that felt almost human. A narrow staircase led into darkness. Halfway down, I found a string. I pulled it, and a single bulb flickered to life. What I saw wasn't a basement. It was a workshop. Shelves lined the walls, old cameras, notebooks, chemical bottles labeled in my husband's precise handwriting. Blueprints covered the table, but they weren't architectural drawings. They were genealogical charts. Names, dates, connections, families mapped like equations. In the corner, a red folder sat alone. The cover read, H Project, Initial Findings. Inside were photographs, black and white, grainy, clinical. Each labeled with a date and a location. And every one of them was taken in this same house. On the last page, I found a short note, written in my husband's handwriting. If you're reading this, you deserve to know the truth about where you came from. But be warned, the truth doesn't heal. It rebuilds. My hands were shaking when I turned the page. There was one more photograph, a baby, wrapped in a hospital blanket. On the back, my name. And a date, 5 years before I was born. Movie camera, if you think that's impossible, you're right. But the next thing I found in that basement made even less sense. And it's the reason I don't sleep well anymore. That night, I couldn't stop hearing the hum of that basement. It followed me home, crawling into the silence between heartbeats. So the next morning, I drove back. This time, I didn't bother with excuses. I needed answers. The red folder still lay open where I'd left it. But something else was there now. A small cassette recorder, half covered in dust. The tape inside was labeled, H12. My husband's voice filled the room the second I pressed play. Test entry 12. Subject located. Anomaly confirmed. Further action pending verification of lineage. His tone wasn't the voice I knew. It was detached, clinical, as if he were reading from a manual. He mentioned names, Henderson, Hale, Whitmore, and then paused. If she ever finds this, she'll understand why the past had to be buried alive. The tape clicked off. I stared at the recorder, waiting for the sound to mean something. My husband wasn't just studying the house, he'd been studying me. I searched the shelves again and found a metal box beneath the workbench. Inside were dozens of labeled cassettes, H1 through H24. Each marked with dates going back more than 15 years. Each tape a record of his obsession. I played another. Static. Then his voice again, closer this time. Phase 2 complete. The property holds residual contamination. Subject shows no physical symptoms. Possible immunity? Immunity. Was that what I was to him? A test subject? A living question? I slammed the stop button so hard it cracked. The echo hung in the basement like guilt refusing to die. In the far corner, something caught the light, a glass jar half buried behind a stack of maps. Inside was a lock of hair, tied with a red ribbon. A label beneath it read simply, M. 1984. My stomach turned. That was the year of my supposed birth, but the handwriting wasn't his. It was hers, the woman from the photograph, the woman who looked like me. I took the jar upstairs and set it on the windowsill. The sunlight made it glow faintly gold, like it wanted to be forgiven. But all I could think about was the hum, that endless, pulsing vibration below my feet. I followed the sound again, back to the basement. And there, under the recorder, I saw what I'd missed before, a square outline cut into the concrete. Fresh cement filled the seams, smooth and deliberate. Someone had sealed something down there. Something recent. Movie camera, if you think you know where this story is going, you don't. Because when I broke that concrete open, I didn't find what I feared. I found something worse that I don't remember deciding to break the floor. I remember the weight of the hammer, the sour smell of dust, the hum in the walls rising like a warning I chose to ignore. Concrete gave way in stubborn flakes, then in panicked chunks. Beneath the slab, a rusted steel hatch, squared, bolted, deliberate. No manufacturer's stamp. No handle. Whoever sealed it wanted it found only by someone willing to bleed for it. The bolts turned as if they hated me. When the hatch finally lifted, the hum quieted, like the house had been holding its breath. Inside waited a shallow compartment lined with lead. A Faraday cradle. In it, a gray lockbox, a ledger wrapped in oilcloth, and an envelope stamped with a laboratory's logo I recognized from medical articles but had never entered, Genaxis Research. I opened the ledger first. Dates. Initials. Short notations in my husband's precise hand. H3, subject denied. H7, false positive. H12, confirm locus. Beneath the page, pressed flat, a birth announcement clipped from a small-town newspaper. My name. My birthday. My mother's name, and a father's name that wasn't my husband's. Not possible. Except the ink was 38 years old and the paper brittle from air that hadn't moved in decades. I slid the Genaxis envelope free. Inside, chain of custody forms, 2 slender reports, and a cotton swab sealed in a hard plastic tube. The first report was short. Mitochondrial concordance, strong. Maternal line suggests match to archived sample labeled M. 1984. The jar on the windowsill. The hair with the red ribbon. Maternal match, to her. But the second report cut deeper, paternal disconcordance with legal record. Likely non-paternity event. Recommend disclosure counseling. Non-paternity. My throat closed on the word. He'd known. He'd tested. He'd chosen to bury truth under concrete and lead. The lockbox refused me until I noticed the keyhole was irregular, bone white, not brass. Not a keyhole. A key shape. I scanned the bench. In a shallow tray sat an object I had mistaken for scrap, a thin carved sliver, ivory-colored, inlaid with a maple leaf. I fit it to the lock. The tumbler sighed. Inside, photographs, all black and white, all dated the year before I was born. A woman in a church doorway, the same woman from the portrait, her smile brave and tired. Beside her stood a man whose profile matched mine more painfully than any mirror ever had. They weren't married in those captions. They were named, and both names matched the line in the ledger labeled H0, starting truth. At the bottom lay one more cassette, unlabeled. I fed it to the recorder with trembling hands. If you're listening, it means I failed to say this to your face. I discovered the first lie by accident, a routine insurance screen, a throwaway test. The second lie made the first necessary. I didn't want to steal your history, I wanted to erase the parts that would destroy you. But history resists deletion. It clings. They asked me to stop looking. They offered money, then threats. Family is an institution with bylaws nobody writes down. I thought I could be your wall. If the wall breaks, take the ledger to the notary named on the last page. He holds a sealed letter from your mother, the one you were told not to ask about. There's one more thing under the floor. If the hum returns, it means they've found the frequency. Don't call the police. Call the number taped beneath the breaker marked B. He owes me. He will get you out. The tape clicked. The hum rose again, thin and metallic, skating along the ductwork like a blade. I checked the breaker panel. Someone had scratched a B into one metal door long ago. Beneath the lip, a strip of black tape and a phone number in pencil. No name. No country code. Just 10 digits that felt older than telephones. I didn't call. Not yet. Instead, I carried the ledger upstairs and laid it on the kitchen table, where daylight felt like witness and notary. On the last page, a neat embossed stamp, Renner and Cole, Notaries Public. An address 2 towns over. A date circled 3 years ago, the week my husband told me the house needed work and left for a weekend he never explained. My phone lit with an unknown text. Stop digging. Family matters die better than people do. No signature. No punctuation, except the period at the end that felt like a threat closing its fist. I looked at the basement door. The hum softened, then steadied, like a heartbeat matching mine. Under the floor, the Faraday cradle sat open. Whatever it had tried to keep quiet was awake now. Movie camera, you think the notary held a letter? He did. But he also held a key to a door I didn't know existed, and a name I'd been warned my whole life never to say out loud. The notary's office sat above a bakery that smelled of butter and endings. The clerk looked up when I said my husband's name, then hesitated before disappearing into a back room. He returned with a brown envelope and an expression I'd seen before, the kind people wear when they know they're handing you something that might change your life. He told me to give this to you personally, the clerk said. And, to make sure you read it alone. I signed the ledger, felt the weight of the envelope, heavier than paper should be. Inside. A single letter, a photograph, and a folded document stamped confidential, Renner and Cole Estate Division. The letter began without greeting. Claire. If you found this, it means the truth has already begun to unravel. Your name was never meant to be yours. It was borrowed, given to protect a bloodline that others would have erased. My name is Margaret Hale. I am your grandmother. I read the sentence 3 times before it made sense. Margaret Hale, the name from the recordings. The same voice that told my husband to stop digging. She hadn't just been a partner in the research. She'd been the architect of the entire deception. The letter went on, her handwriting tightening like a confession pressed through regret. The Reynolds family was not chosen. They were built. The experiment began before you were born, part of a private contract to preserve genetic data linked to the contamination case of '84. The H project wasn't about property or pollution. It was about legacy, and what happens when legacy refuses to die. The photograph slipped from my hand. It was the same church steps, the same woman with my eyes, but standing beside Margaret Hale. Behind them, a man blurred by motion. On the back, a single phrase. We made one mistake. We let her live. My pulse stuttered. I looked around the office, suddenly aware of how quiet it was. The clerk was gone. Only the hum of the old ceiling fan filled the space, spinning slowly like a clock that had forgotten what direction meant. I unfolded the last document, a notarized file naming me as sole heir of the Hale Genetic Preservation Trust. But below that, another signature, witnessed by Daniel Hale. My husband's legal name. He hadn't lied about everything, only the parts that mattered most. At the bottom of the page was a handwritten note from the notary. Do not attempt to contact the trust. They will find you first. Outside, the sky had darkened to the color of old bruises. When I reached my car, a single piece of paper was tucked under the wiper. No words, just a photocopy of my own face, the same one from the church photograph. Someone had been watching me long before today. Movie camera. The notary gave me a name, but what I didn't know was that names have owners, and the one I inherited was about to come looking for me. I noticed the car on the third day. Same make, same color, same place, parked half a block down, engine off, windows tinted too dark for a small town. The kind of car that exists to not be remembered. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Grief can make you paranoid. But by the fifth day, it was still there, sometimes morning, sometimes night, always just far enough away to feel almost polite. I started sleeping with the ledger under my pillow. It wasn't safety, it was a ritual, a way to remind myself the story had weight, had edges I could hold. On the sixth night, the phone rang at 2:13 a.m. No caller ID. When I answered, a woman's voice whispered, "You're not supposed to have the letter." I froze. Who is this? He shouldn't have left you the house. The line went dead. The next morning, I returned to the property. I needed to see if anything had changed. It had. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the basement light was on. And on the kitchen table, where I'd left the ledger, sat a fresh cup of coffee. Steam still rising. Someone had been here. Maybe was still here. I moved through each room quietly, heartbeat matching every floorboard's creak. Nothing. No sign of forced entry. No footprints on the dust-covered stairs. Only the smell of peppermint and something faintly metallic, like a scent memory I couldn't place. Down in the basement, the hatch I'd broken open had been resealed. Fresh cement. Clean lines. And in the corner, the cassette recorder was gone. I wanted to scream, to tear the place apart again, but a folded paper on the bench stopped me. My name written across it, in looping handwriting I didn't recognize. If you keep digging, they will make you part of the study. Stop while you still belong to yourself. That night I drove to a motel 2 towns over. The clerk didn't ask for ID. I didn't give a name. I sat on the bed and replayed everything, the house, the letter, the car, the voice. Each memory felt rehearsed, like someone had arranged my life in scenes designed to provoke curiosity just long enough to keep me from seeing the trap. Then, through the thin wall, I heard it again. That same low hum. The same frequency that had haunted the basement. Only this time, it was inside the room. I tore apart the lamp, the clock, even the smoke detector, nothing. Finally, I found it, a black disc taped under the bed frame. A small transmitter blinking a red pulse. And beneath it, a sticker, GenAxis Research. My husband's ghost wasn't haunting me. His employers were. Movie camera. The worst part wasn't realizing they were watching me. It was realizing they thought I was one of them. Morning came gray and unsympathetic. I hadn't slept. The transmitter lay on the motel dresser beside the folded warning note. Its red light blinked slower now, as if mocking me, or counting down. I thought about running. Then I remembered the letter from Margaret Hale. If she had built the lie, maybe she could also dismantle it. Her last known address was listed on an old trust form I'd found in the ledger, Pinebrook Rest Facility, room 214. I drove there just after sunrise, my hands trembling the entire way. The nurse at the front desk hesitated when I asked for her. "She doesn't get visitors," she said. "Then today's an exception." Room 214 smelled like disinfectant and regret. Margaret Hale was smaller than I expected, but her eyes, sharp, unwavering, hadn't softened with age. She didn't ask who I was. She already knew. "You look like her," she said simply. "That's the problem." I sat across from her. Why did you lie to me? Why did you build all of this? She smiled faintly, a smile without warmth. Because the truth doesn't survive in public. It needs containment. The house was containment. I stared at her, trying to understand. She continued, her voice brittle but precise. Your mother was a researcher. She discovered something during the contamination cleanup, a genetic resistance. You were the first proof of it. But proof becomes property. So we hid you under a new name. Daniel volunteered to be your guardian. He loved you, too much. Eventually, he forgot which side he was on. The world tilted slightly. Everything, the ledger, the tests, the house, was suddenly rearranging itself into sense. And yet, the sense was worse than the mystery. You used me, I said. We saved you, she corrected. Until he decided to dig you up again. Her eyes glimmered with something dangerously close to pride. You have his persistence. That's why they'll come for you. They can't afford another generation of immunity without ownership. I felt the walls closing in, sterile, soft, padded. Somewhere outside, an intercom called for a code blue. Margaret smiled again. You'll never find peace in truth, Claire. Only purpose. I left the room shaking. In the corridor, I pulled out my phone to record a voice note. If anything happens to me, the ledger is in the trunk of my car. Page 47, coordinates. They'll explain everything. But before I could finish, 2 men in gray suits stepped out from a side hallway. They didn't speak. One held up a badge, the other extended a hand. Ms. Reynolds? We need you to come with us. I turned and walked the other way. Then I ran. By the time I reached the parking lot, the sun had vanished behind a curtain of rain. The transmitter on the motel dresser still blinked in my mind like a heartbeat that wasn't mine. I started the car, floored the gas, and didn't look back. Some truths chase you quietly, others ride in the passenger seat. That day, I realized I was carrying both. Movie camera, you think truth sets you free. It doesn't. It trades one kind of prison for another. And mine had just changed locks that I drove for hours without destination, until the highway dissolved into backroads and the rain became mist. In the glove compartment, the ledger thudded with each turn, a heartbeat in paper form. Every name, every number in those pages meant something now. Together, they drew a map of ownership, companies, foundations, and shell trusts all circling back to one root, the Hale family estate. I realized then that I didn't just inherit a lie. I inherited a network. At a diner outside Pinebrook, I borrowed the Wi-Fi and started digging. Public records, financial disclosures, property archives, everything that could be traced digitally. Each time I entered one of the Hale subsidiaries, another would appear, like a hydra growing new heads. GenAxis wasn't just a research company. It was one of dozens of fronts funding a quiet, decades-long project on gene stabilization. The project's earliest funding came from a trust established in 1984, the same year on the jar's label. They weren't studying contamination. They were studying me. I leaned back, trying to breathe. If Margaret was telling the truth, then Daniel hadn't just been my husband or guardian, he'd been my handler. A man assigned to protect the secret until the secret became inconvenient. And now that he was dead, the protection had expired. The car outside the motel wasn't surveillance. It was succession. I copied everything onto a flash drive and hid it under the seat. Then I opened my email and wrote a message to every journalist, every researcher, every whistleblower site I could find. Subject line: The H Project exists. But I didn't hit send. Because halfway through, I realized something Margaret had said was still echoing in my mind. They can't afford another generation of immunity without ownership. Ownership. The documents didn't just list experiments, they listed recipients. Children adopted through private agencies, all born within a 5-year window. Names, locations, genetic tags. All connected to the same trial, And one of them lived less than 50 miles from me. A woman named Lydia Whitmore. I found her address in the ledger's appendix and drove there before I could change my mind. A small farmhouse surrounded by cornfields. When she opened the door, her expression froze, not from fear, but recognition. We were mirrors of each other. Same eyes. Same scar under the chin. She whispered, "You found it, didn't you?" I nodded. Then she stepped aside and let me in. Inside her living room were stacks of papers, identical to the ones I'd seen in my husband's basement, only older, annotated by hand. She'd been collecting them for years. Studying the same truth from the outside. "We were the last generation they made," she said quietly. "You and me. They called us the resistant line. They said we were proof the human body could adapt to poison." I felt my knees weaken. Everything, the inheritance, the secrecy, the research, had been a laboratory written in bloodline form. "And you kept all this?" I asked. "No," she said, looking past me toward the window. "They did. I just learned how to read their language." We sat in silence, listening to the wind scrape the walls. Somewhere outside, a car door shut. 2 headlights cut through the window glass like white knives. Lydia didn't move. "You shouldn't have come here," she whispered. "Now they know where both of us are." The web of inheritance was finally unraveling, but the spider was still alive. And this time, it wasn't hunting me. I was hunting it. Lydia's house went dark when the headlights stopped outside. We didn't speak, we didn't need to. Instinct took over, the kind you don't learn but inherit. We moved toward the back door just as footsteps crunched on the porch. A voice called out softly, too calm to be kind. "Claire Reynolds. Lydia Whitmore. Step outside." I glanced at Lydia. "They know our names." "They've always known," she said. We slipped out the rear exit and ran toward the tree line. Behind us, the house door burst open, boots, flashlights, voices cutting through the corn like blades. For the first time since Daniel's death, I wasn't running from ghosts. I was running from people who still believed they owned me. We made it to an old barn half a mile down the road. Lydia already had a plan. She'd been waiting for this moment longer than I'd been alive. Hidden under the floorboards was a small generator, a laptop, and a set of drives labeled H-Archive. She powered it on, her hands steady. "Every experiment, every name, every funding trail, it's all here," she said. I was going to release it alone. But now there are 2 of us. I watched the screen fill with files, reports, photographs, correspondence, decades of secrets bleeding into code. "We leak it," I said. "All of it?" "No," she replied. "We burn it. Exposure gives them control. Destruction gives us peace." She wasn't wrong. But peace felt like surrender. And I'd already inherited enough silence for one lifetime. I looked at the generator, then the drives. "What if we give them both?" I said. "Let them believe it's gone, while it spreads on every server in the world." Lydia hesitated. Then she smiled. "Your grandmother would have hated that." "Good." We worked in darkness, uploading the files to mirrored servers while the generator coughed in protest. Every minute we bought felt borrowed. By the time the first flames reached the house, the upload was at 78%. When the power flickered, Lydia took a breath and flipped the final switch. The drives began to melt. "It's done," she whispered. Outside, engines roared, black SUVs circling like wolves. We ran out the back, into the fields, smoke curling around us. The house exploded behind us, the sound not violent but final, like a confession burning clean. By dawn, we were miles away. Lydia drove. I watched the sunrise turn the smoke gold. She looked over at me and said quietly, "They'll spend years rebuilding what we destroyed tonight." "Then we've bought the world time," I said. "Time to forget them." She smiled, and for the first time, she didn't look afraid. But somewhere deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Legacies don't die in fire. They adapt. Movie camera. And if you think this story ends with smoke and ashes, you've never seen what survives a controlled burn. By the time the ash settled, the town had already rewritten the story to suit its conscience. A faulty heater. An old farmhouse. A winter spark that found dry timber and an easy wind. People prefer accidents to intentions. They sleep better that way. Lydia and I didn't correct them. We learned from the women before us that truth is not a shout but a ledger, dates, names, payments, the quiet arithmetic of harm. What burned in that house was not history, it was only the illusion that history would keep itself tidy if left alone. In the weeks after, the uploads propagated like seeds after a prairie fire, carried by feeds and forums and the stray curiosity of night owls with nothing to lose. Some files landed in the hands of journalists who still believed the public could be trusted with difficult knowledge. Others drifted into institutions that measured accountability in news cycles and donor lists. A few pieces disappeared entirely, absorbed by systems that feed on secrets and call it governance. I understood then that exposure is not redemption, it is simply light, and light falls where it can. I moved back into the empty house my husband left me, and it did not feel empty anymore. The basement was clean, new concrete, new locks, new air. I kept nothing from that room except one small tag, a tarnished brass key stamped with a number that belonged to no door in our county. I wear it now on a chain beneath my blouse, not as a trophy but as a reminder that locks do not define what they guard, the people do. On the shelf above my desk, I placed 3 photographs. My grandmother in a hand-sewn dress, eyes steady. My mother at a pay phone, jaw set, quarter pinched between forefinger and thumb. Lydia in a field at dusk, smoke behind her, the sky refusing to decide between blue and gold. They do not smile. They do not need to. The lawyers wrote to say some of the named donors on Lydia's drives had stepped down from boards, that investigations were underway, that settlements were being discussed behind doors with hinges older than my marriage. None of it resembled justice. All of it resembled gravity. Money falls where it has learned to land, and power builds furniture exactly where it expects to sit. I stopped waiting for a verdict that would feel like a sunrise. Instead, I kept promises, weekly calls with a reporter who refused to be thanked, periodic messages to the scattered people who found their own names in the archive, a quiet check delivered to a clinic that still answered the phone after midnight. Lydia bought a second-hand truck and planted trees along the road where the cornfield ends. A windbreak, she said, as if the land could be taught to brace itself. We worked in silence most days. On others, we traded recipes and the kind of memories that don't need adjectives, a hand on a shoulder, a laugh that arrives too late to be polite. She never told me the whole of what she had endured, and I never asked. Some histories remain truer as contour than as confession. We both understood that survival is a form of literacy. You learn to read what is not said and to write in margins that are always at risk of tearing. People asked, cautiously, whether I was afraid. I told them the truth, fear is a room with a light switch. You can decide whether to see the furniture before you walk through it. The night after the fire, as the uploads marched across servers and the last drive cooled into silence, I stood in my kitchen with the windows open and listened for engines that never came. In that pause, I recognized the only inheritance I wanted to keep, the refusal to be managed by what had managed my family for generations. Not defiance for its own sake, but a practice, name the thing, refuse the script, share the map. I still talk to Daniel when the house is soft with evening. I tell him I learned that love is not a shield, it is a compass. It doesn't stop storms. It keeps you honest about where the shore is. I tell him he left me an empty house because he did not know how to name the basement, and that I forgive him for thinking silence could be a gift. I tell him the world did not end when we opened the door. It merely widened. There is one more box beneath my bed, labeled in a hand that is not mine. Inside are the copies we did not need to use, affidavits, scans, a single-page note in Lydia's precise script that lists 4 names and 1 date left blank. I do not carry that list with me. I do not threaten anyone with it. I keep it the way you keep water in a winter pantry, an assurance against the day when the pipes might fail again. If that day never comes, the box will become an heirloom of a different sort, proof that sometimes power can be interrupted without being inherited. If you found this because you were searching for a word to replace closure, I can only offer this. There are endings, and there are completions, and they are not the same. Endings arrive with noise, sirens, gavels, headlines. Completion is quieter. It tastes like sleep you didn't have to beg for. It looks like a road you don't check twice before turning onto. It feels like a key that no longer belongs to a door, warming against your skin. Before you go, subscribe and stay close. The next story bends exactly where this one straightens. Different names, familiar furniture, another basement that insists it is a storage room when it is a vault. I won't promise catharsis. I'll promise company, the kind that stands with you in the stairwell, turns on the light, and does not ask you to hurry. What we burned was a house. What we kept was a practice. And practices, unlike legacies, do not demand blood to continue. They ask for witnesses. They ask for hands. They ask for the small, durable courage of showing up again tomorrow, when the smoke has cleared and the silence expects you to turn back. Movie Camera subscribe for the next chapter. The files traveled farther than the fire. And something followed them. Some secrets are never meant to be found, but once you open that door, you can never go back. The truth may break your heart, but it will also set you free. Thank you for watching The Lost Past and the Hidden Will. If you believe every story hides another beneath it, subscribe, because more truths are waiting to be told.